Thank you, Rob. I'm Erin Gallagher. I'm with Accrete AI. The current information sharing environment has served us well in the fight against terrorism. Cultural change has led to federal, state, and private sector security entities sharing more information on threats than ever before. But the volume of information can be overwhelming, especially for organizations with smaller analysis teams. What current technologies might we leverage to better support information sharing? Are dashboards and portals enough to improve our ability to analyze and connect the dots? So at Accrete AI, we strive to make sense out of vast amounts of information and data. That data is growing exponentially, and what we do is produce intelligence products that allow analysts to make decisions rather than sort through voluminous information. So we respect that there needs to be a human in the loop for these decision makings, and that's what we make our intelligence products to do. So we are excited to be here, and we look forward to expanding our partnership out of just DoD and Intel into the Homeland Security enterprise. Kimberly Pratt is the Director of Private Sector Engagement at the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. Her resume is very impressive, but last night she told me that I was only allowed to say that that was her title and not go into details because she's very, very humble. And I will say that I have spoken with all of the panelists here, and I've known some of them for quite some time, and I promise that this will be a very lively discussion and very insightful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. I am so honored to be here with my colleagues today whose combined experience is just incredible between public service, military, police, and technology expertise. We really have an excellent panel for you today. So I'd like to briefly introduce them. We have Brian Pendleton, who's the Chief Data Officer for the Office of Intelligence and Analysis at DHS. We've got Amy Lay, who's been with the Virginia State Police for 19 years and is the director of the Northern Virginia Regional Intelligence Center, the Fusion Center. We have Brian Pate, who is with Big Bear AI as their chief technologist. And we also have Rhett Krula from Microsoft, chief technologist here in the DC area as well. So we've really got a great lineup for you today. So the counterterrorism and homeland security establishment, as we know it, and we've been discussing this the last few days, was really designed after the events of 9/11 and set up to deal with counterterrorism in that environment. It is composed of networks of people, organizations, and supporting technologies to improve the sharing of terrorism information, which really was recognized as a great failure that led to those events on 9/11. Since then, the world has changed drastically. Technology that we've been discussing here has evolved in leaps and bounds is now connected to every bit of US critical infrastructure. In the last few years, the pandemic has brought the world to its knees economically, societally, and for many of us in our own personal lives. And today, on top of these changes, we face a myriad of threats that require new ways of thinking, new responses, and yes, new technologies. Nation-state adversaries threaten our democratic fabric through election interference, cyber threats to our critical infrastructure, economic vitality and supply chains, and aim to steal our most sensitive research, not only from our government, but from our companies across the nation, both large and small. Transnational criminal organizations have adapted their tactics to our environment and to circumvent law enforcement, smuggling or trafficking people, narcotics, and goods out of our borders and into our borders. And of course, we've got lone wolves, homegrown violent extremists, domestic violent extremists, pose increasing challenges within our borders and against soft targets such as schools, religious facilities, large audience venues, et cetera. And of course, workplace violence. All these threats stacked on top of each other are then overlaid in the environment that was set up to deal with counterterrorism. So today, we turn to look at what does the future like. We've been talking about this the last few days, and lots of the ideas that we are going to laser focus on today, we've been discussing over the last couple of days. So let's take a quick look at the current environment. And Brian, I'd like to start with you and ask you a little bit about the federal information sharing. So federal government to government to private sector, and perhaps we'll get to private sector as well. Brian?
Sure, thanks. At the Office of Intelligence and Analysis, I guess it's more than to just say that partnerships are critical to what we do to share intelligence and information, which is, it's a DNA of the Office of Intelligence and Analysis and sort of why we were created in the first place, to not only collect and produce intelligence, but it's through partnerships and outreach that we understand what intelligence we should be overtly collecting and producing and doing analysis on, so that we are being responsive to the information needs of our partners. And as sort of evidence of that, we'll talk about some of the activities and how we're organized, but I'll start by saying our new Undersecretary, Ken Weinstein, has emphasized this as one of, I think, his very first big decisions in his role since confirmation, to structure the organization in a way that reflects the importance of our intelligence partnerships. Just last month, he established a new Deputy Undersecretary position for intelligence partnerships. And just last week, he assigned an acting Deputy Undersecretary to fill that role while he is in the process of filling it permanently, because he wants action immediately to unify our efforts to serve our partners and our customers out in the field who need the intelligence and information that we hold, or that we facilitate access to through our variety of connections with the intelligence community as a member of the intelligence community, as well as through our partnerships with private sector and other components of the department that have information that's needed elsewhere. So within this Deputy Undersecretary organization, there is the Office of Regional Intelligence. This is where we put forward our people. So partnerships are about people. Certainly technology enables the facilitation of sharing of information, but it's through the partnerships with the people that we know who they are, what they need, the trust that we build, because part of why INA exists is not only to share information out, but to bring information out from the field back into the federal government and into the intelligence community so that it can be fused in one location. And so we have 130 plus intelligence professionals deployed across the country and the territories of the United States, multidisciplinary folks. These are intelligence analysts, in some cases overt collection officers to work alongside state and local law enforcement officers, intelligence officers who are providing briefings. They produce regionally focused intelligence analysis out in the field that take in local perspectives. These folks are providing access for appropriately cleared state, local, and even private sector officials, classified threat briefings when it's appropriate and necessary. And that was particularly helpful, I think, in light of the elections and when we're faced with tremendous cyber threats today. They are facilitating reach-back expertise to our workforce that is back here in the National Capital Region to go out to the field and provide briefings, expert briefings, to election officials and Homeland Security advisors and all these folks out in the field. So we also are the program manager for the nationwide suspicious activity reporting. We don't own the technology piece of that, the FBI does, but certainly facilitating the program and making sure that it's functioning, I think, as we would have envisioned it to function is a critical role that we play in that space. And then that's to say nothing of what we're working on with the private sector, which is absolutely critical to what we're doing. Each year, our private sector outreach office, which also falls under this new Deputy Undersecretaryship, is that they reach out with partnering with ODNI, again, partnerships with the Director of National Intelligence, to bring analysts from the private sector, state and local, and the federal government together to collaborate and focus on analytic issues of mutual concern. This last one, we just had 900 analysts from across those different parts of the broader Homeland Security enterprise to come together and study things like bioconvergence and issues of common concern. We partner with the FBI's Domestic Security Alliance Council in working with private sector to host corporate security symposia. This is where we can bring all sorts of industry partners together to have meaningful conversations about what threats they're facing and how we can address those things, how the federal government can help them, how state and locals can help private sector, and how they can help one another. That program in and of itself has reached over 13,000 registered participants to date. And then also Monty Hawkins talked yesterday about the National Vetting Center and what are we doing on the federal side to partner with other organizations. Our partnership with our intelligence community partners is critical to doing classified vetting. Monty talked about the NCTC, the FBI, the NSA, and others. Sort of how are we taking this technology that was sort of originally envisioned for terrorism? And I'll take Monty's example of yesterday. It started out vetting applicants from visa waiver countries for terrorism-related concerns. We took that same technological backbone that Lori Vizlaki right there designed as the technical director, and it was designed in a way that lent itself to threat actor sort of agnostic capability, right? So now Monty is able to use that same technology to start vetting non-immigrant visa holders, or applicants, I should say, for transnational criminal concerns. That same technological backbone is in the planning phase of being utilized to vet folks for counterintelligence-related concerns before they come to our nation. Unfortunately, that capability has not existed historically. So all of these things that I talked about, though, that we're doing are actually threat actor agnostic in nature, and that's by design. And they didn't all exist when INA was created. It's through our partnerships, through having folks deployed out working alongside our partners, that we start to identify and understand what it is that they need, so we can put our resources behind taking a laser focus on meeting what those needs are. When it comes to modernization efforts, Lori's team, so we got the technology piece, Homeland Security Information Network. We facilitate the ability for us to share information with state and locals through the HIS and Intel community of interest, but also for them to share information across the national network of fusion centers and 80 federal partners. Lori's team is modernizing that work by delivering a mobile application. We've got work to do in terms of coordinating with our other federal partners on rolling out some of these more innovative technologies, but they were launched with on iOS in April, and just a week and a half ago they rolled out on Android. We are innovating in terms of our delivery of classified information to the field by piloting this year a mobile classified intelligence solution where folks who are cleared in the field don't have to come to a fusion center to receive classified information. We can bring a classified laptop out to where they are and meet them where they need that information, when they need it. And so we are constantly, through these partnerships and our deployed professionals, identifying opportunities where we identify a need and we figure out a way to try to step up and meet those needs.
Thank you, Brian. I think that it's so important that as we're talking about technology, a big piece of all of this is humans and relationships, right? We can't discount that. That is part of what we need. So real quickly, before we turn to the future and some recommendations that we have as a panel, Amy, I'd like you to talk a little bit about state information sharing activities at the fusion centers and what you're doing.
Sure. So the Fusion Center Network, we've come a long way since 9/11. We now have 80 designated fusion centers that represent every state and U.S. territory. We have baseline capabilities that represent those core functions and processes for information sharing. And some of the ways that we're looking ahead is to better leverage that technology to enhance those already existing processes and procedures. That allows us to have standardization across the network, but allows us to be flexible in adapting to the current threat environment. We've talked extensively about the various threats that we're now encountering as opposed to what we were seeing right after 9/11, and so allowing us to be able to adapt those information sharing processes and technology to adequately address the threats. I'm also fortunate to serve on the National Fusion Center Association Executive Board. So as an executive board, we're always looking for opportunities to expand and meet partner expectations at the local, state, and federal levels. We've been looking at ways that we can leverage technologies, expand those partnerships that Kim mentioned are so important in obtaining resources for fusion centers across the board. One of the particular issues that we've noted as far as information sharing at the Fusion Center level is through our National Suspicious Activity Reporting platform. We've come a long way. When the National Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative was first started, we were able to discuss and talk about we need to be able to share this information. We need to be able to connect those dots and find those commonalities, because we know that terrorists at the time and now criminals aren't necessarily just operating within one jurisdictional boundary. And so we've come a long way from that. We have a platform. We use the FBI technology to share that information with them to further investigations, but we also use it as a nationwide tool for all of the fusion centers to be able to share the information fusion center to fusion center. One of the challenges with that is that a lot of the information is more focused on the CT side. That's what it was developed for. So now as we expand and look at targeted violence, cyber, counterintelligence, other criminal threats like school threats, those don't necessarily fall within the original parameters for a CT mission. So we're looking at ways and opportunities to expand those indicators, expand the suspicious activity reporting indicators, that functional standard from ISE that we have. Right now that's focused on terrorist pre-operational planning. We need to expand that into targeted violence indicators, those individuals that are on that pathway to violence, to be able to better mitigate threats in our current environment. We're also relying heavily on people to manually query databases across the various platforms that we have access to. And so one of the initiatives that we'd like to see moving forward is to be able to have, we know the technology exists, but have technology that's actually real-time looking at the information that's being put into a suspicious activity reporting platform. And that would allow us to not rely on a person to manually read reports, manually query databases, but actually be notified there's commonalities that exist that you need to look at, or there may be a same subject that somebody else reported on, and you're going to get a real-time notification on that. That currently doesn't exist. And so we recognize that if we're going to effectively connect the dots and move quickly to prevent threats, we need to focus in that area.
Great, thank you so much, Amy. I think this is a great transition. In addition to federal and state, of course, we have so many local initiatives. And I think one thing I've been surprised about is just the robustness of corporate intelligence functions, for example, retailers who have incredible loss prevention programs, and then peer-to-peer sharing of information, which somebody brought up earlier, between companies in neighborhoods with their police departments. And so I think those efforts are critical too. And then of course the programs that we have federally and state involve individuals from companies and institutions, programs like InfraGard and DSAC, bringing people together to network at a local level and get to know each other and share information that way. So to transition us and to start to look toward the future, let's talk about data. Actually, I'd like to bring up the second poll if we could. So the question was, are dashboards enough? Are dashboards and portals enough today? And I'm pretty sure the answer is no. If you were to vote, I think that we would probably have 100% of you saying no. So that was kind of just to cue up our next, yes, thank you. Thank you, somebody, for voting. I appreciate it. So let's look at the future. Brian, Pate, and Rhett, let's talk about data. Vast amounts of data are available on any given day, any given year. Does detection of threat actors require different types of data, information, or intelligence?
I'll go. So I think that one of the realities of the present day, and it's only going to continue, is that the types of data, commercially available information, publicly available information, it's just going to continue exploding and proliferating. And the way that the government acquires that data is not sufficient to keep up with the growth of the data types, to understand what data might be useful to which of your use cases. So if you're looking at sex trafficking or human trafficking, the publicly available information and commercially available information that's most useful to you is, for example, ads, commercial ads, e-commerce platforms, sites like Twitter, local sites that Craigslist, things like that. That's a different set of data and type of data than somebody who might be doing a counterterrorism use case that's looking at where is the next Islamic radical terrorist going to come from, where are they talking, versus where might the next domestic violent extremist be propagating extremist content. They're all different data sets. So the enterprise has to be able to kind of rapidly assess emerging data types, triage them, and then make sure that they're available out to the Fusion Center level. And I think it's a very difficult challenge. It requires somebody at a centralized level, whether it's like DHS&T or some other entity, that is constantly scanning for the data that's relevant to the use cases that you want to resolve. And that's just going to keep evolving. And it comes with a host of questions that I'm not sure the enterprise has effectively handled. Data is, by its very nature, dual use. It can cause great harm if handled incorrectly. It immediately challenges our First and Fourth Amendment considerations, but it also is critical for indication and warning. And so the ability to kind of allow like DHS&T to do research on different data types to understand the parameters and help establish the guardrails, that has to happen. I don't think the government can wholly rely on industry to provide them that data that they need either. You're asking industry to accept an enormous amount of risk if you're saying, I need you to go out and do my bulk collection of Discord, which if you wondered where your kids are being radicalized today, it's on their Discord channels while they're gaming. It's like a mimetic sinkhole of violent extremist content and other radicalizing content. But if you're asking the industry to go out and collect that for you, you're asking them to assume a lot of risk that's related to Privacy Rights Acts, GDPR, CPRA, et cetera. And I believe that in order to deal with that explosion of data, the government has to have some mechanism to directly deal with the primary data creators. They have to be able to go engage them to get the data that they need for relevant INW. So,
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I would also add, we take a look. We've already talked about policy is not keeping pace with the technology or the systems that are being used. Things like Discord, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera. So policy certainly needs to keep up, but in general, we just need to, maintain a sense of agility so we could iterate more quickly to be able to embrace these different data sources. And of course, companies like Microsoft and others also collect vast amounts of data. And so having programs in place to be able to share that with government, and not just sharing raw data necessarily, but also providing insights that our people also add. So that way you don't just have to take that and figure it out. So.
Absolutely. So if it does require different data, and we're talking potentially vast volumes of data, what do we need in order to quickly make sense of the data? So let's say we have a collection of 17,000 documents. How can we leverage technology to just get the stuff that I'm interested in?
Yeah, I think, you have stuff at the macro level, which is where Brian spends more of his time in terms of how do we orchestrate around all these different data sets. But if you were to just take a look at one collection of data, 17,000 documents that you just uncovered, how can you quickly understand what are the given topic areas? So we take a look at some of the things we could do with machine learning, right? With unsupervised machine learning, to be able to categorize that data and then essentially cluster it and create topics, right? So now we have given topics which might tell us, here are topics that we didn't even think might be in the set, right? So things we weren't even looking for are now being highlighted. And then we could go through and we could now determine, okay, this is what we have. What do we want to be sharing out of this type of data? And then from an analyst perspective, being able to actually create alerts, right? So if new data falls into a given topic and that topic is of interest, then you get alerted specifically for that topic. So what is relevant for you, I think, is a key aspect. Also, having capabilities, right? Amy, you kind of touched on this, right? Be able to search through. But what if the analyst now had the ability to share what was relevant to peers or others in other states, right, or locals? And then if we could take that information, so now we're not just being reactive, right? We have a mechanism for the automation of clustering of topics, alerting to, hey, there's new data here. What if we could then take those models, be able to containerize the models, and run them at the edge where they might be needed for local processing, maybe in a disconnected state. I take a look at some of these newer, lower powered devices. Some of them can be powered by the sun. So maybe we're ingesting live video data, maybe it's of the border or something else, and we're doing local processing to detect for, hey, here's a human, here's a SUV, here's XYZ, and now we have these two groups coming together, let's alert on that or something of that nature. So I think it allows us greater mobility, and then the flexibility to bring that where we need it, right? So whether we want to run it locally or run it on some other platform, right? We've now, taken some of the constraints away.
I really like where Red is going with this whole idea of bring your own model. I coined that term, bring your own model. And you create the infrastructure, the government creates the infrastructure to allow different technology entities, whether it's academia or industry or the government itself, to develop the models that are needed for particular use cases and use them at the edge, down at the fusion centers or at the enterprise. And I think a measure of success of that is if you see an RFP that at some point that says, I need models that do these certain things against particular data sets.
So a question I have is, we're really talking about data science. And are our intelligence analysts the right people to be working with data science? Or do we need different types of data professionals in our government? Brian, Amy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean,
besides you, Brian, the chief data officer.
very biased. We absolutely do. And it's not just data scientists. If you put a data scientist to work alongside an analyst, they'll do anything to automate their processes. And perhaps they inadvertently do something inappropriate in the process, which is why you need governance that precedes that. Once you understand what data you need, somebody needs to broker your access to that data, and somebody needs to address privacy and oversight concerns prior to use of that data, which is critical to actually making sure that we're using data appropriately to answer our most pressing questions. Those are data professionals. Somebody has to clean that data and make it useful. Somebody needs to standardize that data. And if you pay a very expensive data scientist to do all of that front-end work, you're not leveraging their actual technical skill set to do what they're really good at, right? So our data scientists should not be spending 80% of their time doing the front matter of work to prepare data to do what they're really talented at, which is applying some of these advanced techniques that my colleagues from industry just talked about. We want to sort of cut them loose and let them be good at what they're really good at. So that requires a cadre of actual data professionals, which is kind of a new idea in the federal government that emerged following the Evidence Act and the establishment of chief data officers generally. And we're just trying to figure out sort of what's the right way to structure and what functions do we need to perform to actually be a fully capable organization that can accelerate analytic discoveries. And obviously, that's my lens as coming from an intelligence background, but I think more broadly in the federal government, this is about how do we use data to make evidence-based decisions? How do we use it to answer our most pressing questions, which is where I'm particularly interested in the intelligence world. And it's all about starting with what questions you have, what data do you need to answer the questions, and then you select the right technologies, and then you enlist the people who can actually get the insights out of it. But there is preceding work that must occur that I think requires not just data scientists.
Excuse me, got a tickle in my throat. Yes, I completely agree. I think having that partnership between the data scientist and the analyst, for the analyst to be able to understand what data is out there and available, but also to be able to drive some of the technology and asks for what needs to be automated. What processes are they manually doing that could be automated and would free up their time to then look more at particular topics or areas of interest and be more proactive and look towards preventing particular threats or addressing concerns better from an analyst perspective, doing assessments rather than looking for the data sets, trying to find the information that they need.
Right. So for all of you, where can the public and private sectors work together to address these challenges? And are there certain use cases that lend themselves to this kind of collaboration?
Well,
Anyone?
I guess I'll start. Taking a look, and of course, right, Microsoft represents one of several major hyperscale cloud platforms, right? So that allows tremendous opportunity to be able to ingest large amounts of data, process large amounts of data, be able to quickly share that data, and use, of course, the advanced AI and machine learning capabilities to have greater insights and that type of thing quickly. I think feedback from government, right? Are these approaches the right path, right? Is one aspect, right? Because we could only think of what we could think about, right? So if we get your feedback, we could incorporate that into our planning and bringing these capabilities to life. I think another aspect to it, you and Brian, you spend more of your time in the intelligence space. Having the opportunity to have consistent platforms and tooling across these different classification levels, I think is, or will be a tremendous opportunity, right? We're still working on that, but I know others are as well, but having consistency across those levels, so that way you could take your process at the low side, move it to the high side, and not have to change much. So you get a lot of value from that.
Yeah, I'll just, my opinion is that probably a priority area for the government and private sector work is on data standards. I think it's not a new topic, but industry needs the government to give them some directionals on what standards they should be used for which data types. I'll give you as an example, at Cyber Command, this will implicate things at CISA as well. There's discussion of using Elastic Common Standard version 1.1 for indexing and assisting with parsing with technical net flow data. They recognize that there needs to be extensions. That is a huge decision that is a lot of people in industry are waiting for some certainty around that decision before they tool all of their products to support that standard. But some mechanism to guide industry toward the right standard, to take feedback from industry on the standards, to ensure that you don't get locked into a standard that then limits your ability to correlate data from disparate data sets. So if we were to lock in on ECSV 1.11 right now for technical data, it doesn't have the hooks to bring in what I'll call persona layer data about actors that you might want to understand and what they're doing in dark web forums or in kind of well-known social media. So that has to be thought through, and there probably needs to be some governing entity, I don't want to use, governing is apparently a bad word, we found out last night at the debate, but some coordinating entity that kind of rapidly composes taxonomies and so that data can be made usable more broadly, and that's critical to sharing and realizing structured insights.
Thank you. I'm so aware of our rapidly dwindling time, and there's so much to talk about on this topic. So for each of you, one major recommendation for the U.S. government in this arena. Brian.
That's a tall order. Okay. So throughout this entire conference, I continue to hear, not just here, but pretty much everywhere I go as a chief data officer, is I hear that data is in silos, and this is a problem. And how do we improve information sharing? And that's kind of where the conversation seems to stop. We note that it's a problem, but we haven't sort of taken the next step to action. And I've been really sort of pressure testing some ideas with folks in these breakout sessions that have been rather therapeutic for me. When you think about going beyond terrorism, so you've got terrorism information, I think we're pretty darn good at sharing that now after all these years. And I think we know what data we need to identify terrorists and keep the nation safe from them. When you think about these other threat actors, do we even know what data exists across the broader Homeland Security enterprise that could be useful to answering the knowledge gaps that we have? I would say we don't know holistically. And I would also say that perhaps we don't even know what the most critical ones are. We might have one-off ideas about sort of what they are. So go back to the questions for every one of these threat actors and say, what question do we have? What data exists? And then you can apply these technologies that my colleagues are talking about. Then you can get the insights that you need out of it. But to do that, what the federal government's doing, prescribed by the Evidence Act again, is creating a federal data catalog. It doesn't sound fun, and it's actually not fun to do, frankly, but we need to know what data assets actually exist, which requires some yeoman's work to actually roll up your sleeves and document these things. And there's no immediate payoff for doing this. I mean, we're compelled by legislation to do it in the executive branch, but our state and local partners don't necessarily have that same sort of direction to do that. But I think it's a necessary first step, because as data proliferates and the volume increases, the problem just gets worse. You don't know what data actually exists across geographic boundaries to help you answer your questions. But once you know it exists, then you can select from that menu. Then you can reach out and bring it in. Then you can start actually answering the questions that need to be answered for each one of these different types of threat actors that we mentioned.
So as Lieutenant General Roper said, we need all domain awareness, right? And we need it with our data too. And that's not going to be a one-step process. That's going to be an everyday process for the rest of the future, right? Amy.
I touched on the suspicious activity reporting and the need for real-time analysis. Also kind of piggyback on what Brian was saying, and just having a platform that state and local fusion centers can go to access information. Right now, there's a multitude of platforms. There's a multitude of apps. There's a variety of different places that you go to. So there's not one place to go and obtain information. It requires querying multiple databases, looking in different places for information. So if you forget to check one of those boxes and go to those databases, you've potentially missed key information to further investigations or mitigate any threats. And so really one of the challenges I would say is trying to figure out a unified federal platform for sharing with your fusion centers and your state and local. And I know that's a conversation that we've had for many, many years. But to Brian's point, we have the conversation, but how can we make that happen? How can we look to have that unified place that, not only just for state and locals, but I'm sure our federal partners would like to have a platform to go to and have access to all of the information. So that and the real-time analysis of SAR are the biggest takeaways for me.
Great. Thank you, Brian. Pate.
Yeah, I would complement Brian's kind of enterprise effort by picking two fusion centers or a handful of fusion centers, resourcing them with a team of data scientists that will go and sit with the analysts at the fusion centers and ask them what questions are you trying to answer, and then they will look at that localized level at what data holdings are available, groom that data to see if it can become a question-focused data set, and see what they can glean from it. And it should be tethered back into the enterprise through Brian's organization or some similar organization, so that they can access back into enterprise data repositories, get the data they need. And that should be evaluated, and the efficacy of that approach should be reviewed and evaluated, and if it works, rinse, wash, repeat.
Rhett?
Yeah, so I think, right, the title of this was Advancing the CT Enterprise for Modern Threats, right? And of course, the threats that we see, they continuously change, they morph, they grow in nature, and the impacts they have also increased. So I think the only way really to be able to address that right at the scale and speed that they're operating on is really to take a look at the policy and culture that we have. Right, we need a culture that can enable much greater agility than we're traditionally accustomed to. And of course, technology is going to continue at it, to advance at a pace. So we need to be able to more quickly embrace that, put that into our process, our policy, and be able to more quickly realize outcomes, while at the same time having more loftier goals of having this broader catalog and processing and understanding inventory, because the data that we collect is probably going to be more quickly, it's come to life and now is useless, right? So we need to be able to gain the insight as quickly as possible.
And so I think with all of these, partnerships are going to be key, and we're going to have to invest in talent for all of this, right? These are critical. So I'm so sorry we are completely out of time before our next speaker joins us. Thank you all so much for your expertise and sharing with us today.
Yeah, thank you.